All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our night away from the kids. Well, my kids are like banging on the door, but Haley's night away from the kids. And this is my good friend, Haley, and she and I are going to talk a little bit about a hard topic that really is, affects actually more women and families than is talked about. But as far as rise and climb goes, we're going to talk a little bit about our miscarriage journey and how we rose and, rise and climb to through that grief, and a little bit about our journey. And I wanted to start off though in that everybody in this journey, I've talked to a lot of people. There's such a huge spectrum of where people are at. And some people are, I don't want to say okay with it, but have really embraced, the lot that they were given, and are okay. And I know other people who, totally devastated their year and their, a big bump in the road. And I think a lot of that depends on the history and the backdrop and the stories of that and the hopes and dreams that went into that pregnancy. And so with that being said, I hope that you feel free as a listener to, be where you are at in your journey, and understand. I know I kind of use sometimes humor to cope with my stuff for good or bad. But Haley and I, we've processed through a lot in our journey. So if anything ever talks, if you're newer and this is fresher, it's probably going to be more difficult. And for me, I don't get too emotional about it unless I'm in a certain spot and thinking about certain things. But other than that, it's kind of I don't want to say matter of fact, but it's more of a retelling. I don't know if you have something to add to that, but I wanted to cover that on the front end because it really is a sensitive subject.
Yeah, I think I would just want it to be, like you said, for everybody to feel okay with where they're at, but to also just have the conversation be validating, to be able to talk openly and sometimes matter of factly about things that are just, in the community of people who have experienced a miscarriage, that it's that you can like talk openly and that the people that you're talking with know what you're talking about. That it's not weird.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to move this mic up a little more so that I know that we are not cutting off. Haley, surprise, is pregnant again. So that is really exciting, a little rainbow baby. So we get a good shot of that. I would say that now. But yeah, so that is really exciting. I was telling Haley just now that we miscarried in May, so it's now January, so that's 6 months for us. And I said we probably aren't going to try for a few more months yet, because that's just where we are at and where we decided. But you guys kind of decided right away, right, to try again?
Yeah, well, it's kind of been our plan all the while. Our joke is, when Willie and I got married, it was like, well, how many kids do you want? And I was like, 10. And I was like, how many do you want? And he's like, 4. And we're like, okay. So ever since then, we've just been like one at a time. But we already have 4. So Josie, which was the little girl that we lost a few months ago, she would have been number 5 in the house. And so this will be number 6.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess we say now that we're taking it one at a time.
Well, it is kind of funny because, Michael and I for sure want 4, but we've kind of both been like, but if we have 6, we're not going to be mad about it. Because I come from 6, he comes from a family of 5.
And you have twins in your family.
And we have twins in our family, exactly. So my mom had 4 kids and then she had twins. So that's how we have 6. And my mom's siblings are twins. So my grandma had twins, my mom had twins. Yes, twins around in my family. And but then once we miscarried, it was like, okay, God, was the 6 a part of a miscarriage or not, and it seems like a silly thing, but it was kind of like a real thing, because it's like, as much as I'm not a huge like I have to family plan, it's it's in there, and so, and I felt like God be let me talk it out with him, but it wasn't anything like, yes, Anna, I didn't hear this big voice about it. But yeah, it is interesting how that does play? And actually that's kind of that's kind of a later question, but let's jump into that. Is how do you reference your miscarriage when you talk about it? Do you find yourself wanting to even explain that this is your fifth pregnancy or sixth pregnancy, and that sort of thing? So
yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends the context that I'm talking about it with, and maybe specifically what question is being asked. Like if someone were to say like, well, how many kids do you have? Then like personally, I would include Josie. So I would say like, well, we have 4 at home and we have 1 in heaven. But then sometimes like I would say, oh, this is, me and my husband and we've got 4 kids at home. And I don't have to say, I don't have to like always,
explain. Yeah. I think I find, I have 2 kids. I think I say that a lot. But I think the biggest thing for me is like people be like, how's this past year? Because it's 2020, so it's like, and really I find myself more so talking about it in reference of how was your year, and when we miscarried, it was in the midst of the lockdown in Wisconsin. And so there weren't places we could go. And my husband was working overtime Monday through Saturday. And I clocked it up and he was gone over 70 hours. So I say that of like, I was at home by myself mostly. My sister and my mom would come over and stuff. And then I miscarried, and so kind of more as I kind of find it talking about it more in that context of like, it's been a hard year, there's been ups and downs this year. And that's just kind of a context. And and sometimes I try to bring it up to normalize it, because I just find people just don't talk about it. And I want to create space for people to be able to talk about the good and the bad that happened in their year or their family. So but it is interesting because I would like to find honoring ways to talk about our baby and include them in our family story, without having though to like coddle somebody, like I don't need people to reassure me that it's okay. So sometimes I don't even want to bring that up because it's like, I'm okay, so it's interesting bringing up grief because it's awkward for some people. Have you found that much?
One thing that's been really helpful for us is that we talk really openly about it with our kids. Like our kids knew that we were expecting a baby. Our kids knew, the baby died, but it's still in mommy's belly. Our kids knew like we're going to go to grandma and grandpa's today because, the baby's going to come out. And then we actually introduced the baby to our children, and like we had the blessing of being able to do that. I know a lot of people aren't able to do that. And so their response to seeing her was just like, she's so tiny. It's our tiny baby. And so all of their conversations around Josie are, and they bring her up all the time. They bring her up when other people are around. And we've never like stopped them from bringing it up because we want them to know that it is like a normal part of like she's part of our family and that, they got to see her and we buried her. And so, I mean, a lot of times they'll be like, we're just having a conversation with somebody and they're like, well, did you know my mommy had a baby in her belly and she died? And then we're just like, yeah, that did happen. Do you have anything else you want to say about that? Or, and we don't, and I like welcome, like, I don't feel, and this is what you're saying too, is this like, people are totally at different places, in their grieving process. But I like talking about her. So it doesn't feel sad for me, especially because if nobody was at the house and I was just talking with the kids about her, like it feels comfortable and natural to do. When somebody else is entering into that like would be normal conversation for us, then the only thing I'm almost kind of wondering is I wonder what they're thinking, because personally I feel like we're like all okay with talking about it. And then I think that in a lot of instances, most cases, I think that they do feel welcomed into that. And we've done like a lot of things to, think we have her ultrasound picture, and when we got the ultrasound and the confirmation of pregnancy, we were given these two little knit booties before we found out that we lost her. And so we have those like hanging up in the car. So when we're in the car, they'll bring it up with, you know, if somebody's sitting beside me. Did you know that those are, and sometimes they say it very not
like
tactfully.
Yeah.
They'll be like, those are our dead babies' booties. And I'm like, yeah, we did have a baby in mommy's belly and she did die. But we do say, but she's alive now and we'll get to see her. And so it doesn't feel like a sad topic in that way. So I actually appreciate the refreshingness that the kids have about it, because it was something that affected them too. It was their little sister and that they were expecting. And walking through that with our littlest one, it was interesting because even after a while, she was still like, but when is she going to grow up? And I'm like, well, she's not going to grow up like you guys grew up. And she's like, well, I was a baby in your belly and I came out and I grew up. And I'm like, yeah, but you know, Josie was baby in mommy's belly, but when she was in mommy's belly, then she died. And then, so when she came out, we buried her in the ground. So she's not going to like, for right now, come out of the ground.
Yeah.
But one day, you know, that's the hope that we have for the resurrection.
Yeah, that, you know, my kids were 3 and 2, you know, under that actually. So it is a really different experience. And I think that's, you know, and I think for me, like my story is like, I in general have a harder time connecting with my babies. And, you know, I feel like each kid I have, like, and even when my baby comes out, you know, both with Benny and Cora, I didn't feel this like immediate connection with some people do. For me, like, I'm just not a little kids person. Like, I love my own kids. And so it's just, I think that again plays into it, where like I have kids so that I can have older kids. Like that's so I think for me, like there's a saying in Courseval, like every day I love you more and more. And I feel like that really describes me and my kids. Like the older they get, the more I know them, the more they become intertwined in my life. And so for me with that miscarriage, it is a little like part, you know, it's such a weird grief. And so one of the devotionals that I got afterwards to help me grieve, because it's still, even if you're not, you know, totally bonded in that sense, you still grieve it. And it's, I'm grieving the child I never knew. And that was a really good devotional for me to really help bring some feelings and, you know, and process some things through a woman who's gone through it 4 times, maybe 5. So, yeah, so I think that was good, but I think it is a little different because my kids were younger. So we don't have little kids asking us about it because they didn't know at all. No, I even tried to be like, mommy's pregnant. And they're like, you know, they had no idea what that meant.
Our youngest is 2.
Yeah.
And what yours are?
So Benny turned 3 in September. So he wasn't even 3 yet. Okay. So he was 2.5 at this point. And then Cora was 1 and you know, I don't know. Just over 1, like 1 and 4 months. So yeah, and I think for me as well, like, and so, well, before I go into that, I think it's kind of helpful to like hear people's miscarriage story. And so if you could kind of share, you know, how far along were you, what were the conditions, you know, and just kind of that, and then we'll go into, so maybe kind of finding out and then what it was like to actually go through the miscarriage. So
sure. So we found out that we were expecting in June. No, wait, June. Yes. We found out that we were expecting in June. And I think I was like 10 weeks. And I was like, well, I haven't really like, you know, made an appointment with anybody or whatever. So I started calling around and I had decided on a place that I thought we would have the baby. And we scheduled our first appointment with the midwife. And I was like, well, the appointment isn't going to be until I'm 10 weeks. And the most accurate early dating ultrasounds are like between 9 and 10 weeks. Like, should I go and get one? And they're like, if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, there's no pressure to. Like, you don't have to have one. We would still see you. But I just wanted to go get one. So I just went to an independent, it's like just a pregnancy clinic in town. And I got an ultrasound for like a confirmation of pregnancy. And I was 10 weeks when I went in that day, according to my last menstrual cycle. And they give you like a pregnancy test in the very beginning before you take it, just so that they can confirm, you are pregnant, and then you get the ultrasound right after that. So the pregnancy test was positive, and then I went in for the ultrasound. And actually, this was the only time that Willie wasn't with me for one, because I don't know. I guess we had just done it, so many times at that point that it was like, it's going to be like, this long. It's not a long ultrasound. It's very short. And they're just going to, make sure the baby's in the right spot and tell you like the actual date. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure we're pregnant. Like, it's not like, woo, we're pregnant. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
So he was like, do you want me to come? I'm like, no, it's going to be okay. So then when I went in and they went on the ultrasound, I knew right away, because I mean, the first thing that you're looking for is that little thing, the heartbeat. And there wasn't that. And the baby wasn't moving, where normally they're jumping around like a little bean. And not that beans jump.
Yeah. Jumping beans. Yeah.
And I was like, but it was so surreal. It didn't even, it just felt like I was watching a movie. I was just like, in my mind, I'm thinking, baby's not moving. There's no heartbeat. And the ultrasound technician is talking about everything except the baby.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I already know, but I'm not going to say anything. And they're like, well, here's your cervix, here's your this, here's that, here's baby's head in the rump. And what I don't see is a heartbeat. And I was like, yeah, I could tell. So then after that, it was just like, it just felt weird. And I wasn't like, extremely sad right away. It just felt surreal. It felt like, oh, like I can see there's a baby. I knew I was pregnant, and now the baby's not alive anymore. And so she was measuring at 9 weeks one day at the time of the ultrasound, and I was 10 weeks. There wasn't a heartbeat or a yolk sac. And so they were like, we can say pretty definitively that you are experiencing a miscarriage, which is when the baby dies, but you haven't started delivering yet. Which actually, from like friends that I've talked to, from the time that they find out, if you are able to find out ahead of time, there's like so many different circumstances about finding out how you're miscarrying. Some people, their first inclination is that they're bleeding, or some people find out ahead of time, like at an ultrasound or through some other kind of test. And so the time that you have from when you know what's going on to when the baby actually comes is different in a lot of circumstances. And that, I think, changes a lot different women's experience with having a loss of baby. So after I left the clinic, I just got in the car and I called my husband, and they had given us these little booties I mentioned earlier. So they give you the pregnancy test first, and then they gave you these booties, and they're like, okay, good, we're going to go into the ultrasound room. So I have all like the booties and stuff on the stuff with my clothes, and then I'm leaving, and I feel like a fraud with these little booties.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know, I was like, I feel like it'd be rude if I was like, you can have your booties back or whatever. And at the time I was just like, whatever. So in the moments when I got in the car, I just kind of threw them on the floor. And I wasn't, well, maybe not on the floor, maybe just on somewhere in the car.
Just like discarded them.
I wasn't like thinking about them. And I was just like, but later on, once like I had just thought about it more and had started like grieving, I was thankful that we had them because we have 4 kids. So we hadn't bought nothing new for the baby at all. The baby was getting nothing new. Okay. So I felt really happy that I had them. And so that was like a special thing to me that I wanted to keep in their hanging up in the car. Which another thing is like, I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one of your questions was that people like how to, like encourage someone who's going through pregnancy loss. And I think people grieve so differently that there are like 1,000,001 ways that someone could process a loss. And for me, it would be very comforting to like have these reminders of her around. And then for other people, they're like, I got rid of the ultrasound pictures. I didn't tell anybody, and that helps me. And that's how I like go through it. And I don't want to talk about it. And that's okay. Like that's, it's not like, oh, you need to talk about it. It's like, no, if they don't want to talk about it, they don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's not like, oh, this person had a burial, I should have had a burial. I was just like, no, it's like whatever. Like everybody has freedom and like to grieve the way that helps them the most, and they should have space for that and not feel pressured or shamed or feel like they have to do something that somebody else does.
Yep, exactly. And I think where I see that the most is with how women choose to pass the baby. I see that. For me, like just a DNC, and for those that might not know, that's when they kind of go and they suction the baby out. That just wasn't an option, for me, because, well, my story is a little different where I just all of a sudden just had pain someday. And honestly, I thought it was either an ectopic pregnancy or like my appendix. It was like the sharpest, like weirdest pain. And I just knew, I was like, I never had that with Betty and Cora. So, and it was during COVID lockdown. So I was like, I didn't want my appendix to burst. So I was a little more proactive. So actually, and you couldn't go in at this point to like urgent care or the doctor, like it was ER or nothing. So I actually called Nurse Direct and they're like, no, you should go in, because it wasn't going away. And I went in, so then I'm in the ER all by myself because nobody can be there, just super sterile environment. And I didn't think I was miscarrying at all. Like I said, I was more like, what is going on? I honestly thought, I think this is just ligament pain, growth pain. It's my 3rd kid, pushing out some ligaments. And then when the ultrasound tech came in, I noted her like demeanor change where she was like, all of a sudden got super peppy, like halfway through. And like, I wasn't like, oh, I'm not pregnant anymore. But it was like, something's off. But I was like, you know what? I'm not going to let my mind go there. So I just waited. And then you wait forever. And then the doctor came in and then he was like, well, so the news is like, we don't know what the pain is from. It's probably just ligament pain and growth. But we found 2 sacs and it's basically not viable. And then he left and it was like, so I was like, okay. And like, I didn't even know what questions that. So for me, it was like, wait a minute, I have twins? Like, wait a minute. Like, and he's like, but you're going to need another ultrasound in a few days to kind of confirm. So for me, it was like, there's so much going on. That does not mean the babies or maybe, and this is where it's kind of like, I use this joke as like, I call my maybe babies, because it's like, maybe I had 2, I don't know, and so then it was really weird too, because it's like, and I actually shared openly on Facebook when I was going through it, because,
which I super appreciated.
Yeah,
because that was before we miscarried.
Yep. And a lot of women have reached out to me from that because they know that I miscarried. I just felt I'm supposed to share this so people can be praying. So for me, it was like, there's still a chance. There's still hope. Like there was nothing in me that said, this is done. So we were praying, for that miracle and hopeful for that. And it was a little different for you. You kind of just had this piece of like, there's no heartbeat. We're okay. We're sad, but that happens.
And I still chose not to have the DNC too, because I was like, who knows? And I'm like, his will be done. So if it is that they're, wrong and the age was off and baby's fine, then I'm like cool with that. But I feel like the evidence was there that it wasn't. And I'm like cool with that because I know.
Yep. And I know women who are like, I had natural and I regretted it, because I bled for so long and it was such a painful reminder. I know people of really strong faith who are like, no, I just, and that's where I really would affirm that it's just like, you've got to do what you feel best and comfortable with. And that's really between you and God. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
And, being a person of faith. So for us, it was like almost 3 weeks though. Cause then when I went back, they're like, well, now there's one sac, and like basically there wasn't like there's something there that wasn't there last time, but now it's one. So it's just like, okay, so not my mate, like not be like not so then it was like, was that a vanishing twin? And were my dates off? So then I had to wait like 2 more weeks. So for us to like find out that, but God like really gave me like songs and dreams. And then like from the get-go, it was, my babies are alive, whether they're alive in me or they're alive in heaven. And that really brought a lot of peace. But the day before I got my miscarriage, I was like, we got the news that no, we miscarried, like I knew, and so, but yeah, but then by that time, like I was only a week away, like I was only days away, and I kind of started spotting, so I didn't have to wait long. And I think that process of waiting is super painful. But the hardest thing I found about that season is your body kind of still thinks it's pregnant. So like that weekend before, I wore like a dress and it totally looked like I was pregnant, and everybody was like, Anna, you are pregnant, and I'm like, I know, right? My gosh. But that's what they don't talk about, is your boobs can still keep growing. Your stomach still keeps growing. Milk comes in for some people.
Yeah.
Did you experience that?
I had first trimester symptoms. And that was one of the things they asked. They're like, well, are you experiencing like first trimester symptoms still? I'm like, yes. I had that for weeks after we lost her. So yeah, that's very hard, because now you're grieving and you're still feel pregnant, nauseous and tired and all that. So that is why I think it is so different for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so
but reiterate, whatever plan that like a woman has chosen, or in the event of having a miscarriage, like in the future, there's like a medical procedure that you can have done, and there are benefits and risks with that. And then there is, well, I would say surgical, and then there's medical for like a pill that you can take that would help to, you would take it and you would pass the baby naturally at home, but it would speed up the process, and there are benefits and risks with that. And then for the expectant waiting, or the just waiting for the baby to come on their own, there are risks and benefits to that, and like to not feel any sort of shame with either what decision that you had made in the past, or with looking ahead, like pressure from whoever, wherever, somebody else's decision that they made, how they were going to do it. But just to feel like, how do I feel like this is going to play out best for me, if I do have that confirmation. And they're so much better now about having accurate diagnosis, that even when I went in, there's no heartbeat, there is no yolk sac, baby's measuring a week beyond or behind from what I am, and not moving, they still wouldn't even say that I lost the baby, because there are subsequent things that they would want to do to make sure, because they don't want to give somebody a false negative, I suppose. And then have them do an elective DNC, and then, well, whatever. They don't want to be wrong about that. So I appreciated that. And what they would do then is to take your quantitative HCG. They would measure where your HCG level is. Then they'd have you come back in a little bit, take it again. And if your HCG is steadily going up, then it's possible your dates are off and the baby is fine and there's just no heartbeat that is visible at that time. Or if it's going down, then it's more conclusive that, that's actually what's going on. That's what happened. But I think with a lot of the accuracy that they have now with the
imaging
and giving you, like you can go and just say, if this is accurate and I don't want to wait, because waiting, I have a friend who waited for months and months, like 6 months, like, and then she finally went in and they were like, it's been a really long time. It would be good to just, because there are different risk factors that come in with waiting, as far as, your lining deteriorating or,
and risks of infection.
Yeah. So there are different things like that. So, and if you want to be able to just say, I just want it done with, I want it to be over with, and I want to know when it's going to happen, have my loved one there with me or not, and just have it done, then that's fine. Or if you're like, well, I want to do it at home, but I don't really want to just wait for whoever knows how long, then you can opt to have the medicine and go through the risk factors and that to see if that's a good choice for you.
And I think this is hard to say because I want to be a podcast of hope, but I think education is hopeful. I know my sister actually miscarried and she waited and passed naturally and ended up in the ER, and that was you as well, who delivered at home but ended up in the ER, and she, before she even could properly deliver, ER and ended up having to do a DNC in the ER because the bleeding wouldn't stop. Then I have a friend who, and this is rare, but went in to have a DNC and then a few days later had the baby at home. It's just like any other pregnancy. You have no idea what could go on. And so it really comes down to what you can emotionally handle. And for me, it was more of I was really hopeful that we would have a miracle. So I was giving God every, minute, and that's where I was at. But I was really close to a hospital, so it's just like there's so many factors that come into it, because many women end up in the ER having a baby at home, which kind of brings me to your story on that, and where we really, Marco, poloed a lot about this topic. But because this is probably going to be a longer podcast, I'm going to cut it off halfway and kind of stop and then restart. So this is going to be part 1, and then join us for part 2 as we kind of go more into the topic of actually having the miscarriage and some of the things that we really feel we would like to see improved upon in this field and advocate for, because there really is no great answers right now for women. We really feel like this could be a way we could better serve women. So join us back with part 2, and thanks for listening so far.